focus is on the Indian American vote. It's a key vote bank in America. There are more than 4 million Indians in America, or Indian Americans you could call them. According to an estimate, more than 1 million of them are eligible to vote. Indian Americans are an influential voting bloc. Traditionally, they have sided with the Democrats, but in the past 4 years, US President Donald Trump has developed a close relationship with Prime Minister Modi. Will that help Trump? Or will it be Kamala Harris who delivers the Indian American vote to the Democrats? To discuss this and more, let's go straight to our dialogue partners this evening. From Washington, D.C., Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, advisor to the Trump campaign. From Arlington, Virginia, Varun Nikor, president of the AAPI Victory Fund. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Dave Ramaswamy, entrepreneur, strategic affairs analyst, and an Indian American community volunteer. And from Florida, we have Kelly Hyman, who's a Democratic strategist. Hello and welcome to all of you.
Hello. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Rogers, let's begin with you. Will Donald Trump get the Indian American vote?
I have no doubt. Here in New Jersey, the Indian community actually created the South Asian Coalition Republican Organization. Totally backs the president, has supported the president from day one. And this is a huge, a massive voting bloc here in New Jersey that's spreading out to Pennsylvania. So yes, he is going to win the Indian vote.
According to a survey, Lieutenant Rogers, 72% of the registered Indian American voters back Joe Biden for the presidency. Where do you get your numbers from?
Well, I get my numbers from being on the ground and talking to people. I'll tell you something about these polls. They ought to just cut and paste what they had in 2016. This is the same sheet of music. These polls mean nothing. What really means is what the people are doing on the ground. So I get my stats, I get my information directly from the people.
Varun Nikor, the strong Indo-US ties were on display on Tuesday when the American leadership signed a major defense pact with India here in Delhi. Do you feel any of these last-minute deals and this positioning will have an impact on the Indian American voter?
Absolutely not at all. This is not a foreign policy election. Very few elections in the United States are foreign policy elections. Certainly, we give the Trump administration credit for trying, but it's sort of a Hail Mary pass, if you will, these last 6 days prior to an election. There's no evidence whatsoever that sways U.S. voters. Absolutely none.
No election, in fact, is a foreign policy election. I think domestic issues weigh more prominently on the minds of the voters, but I'm sure the Indian voter, the Indian American voter, is also tracking what's happening here in India. Dave Ramaswamy, Trump's policy towards India has been full of flip-flops. He's often talked about his friendship with the Indian Prime Minister, but he extended his trade war with India. He tried to block visas to skilled Indian workers. He has openly complained about Indian tariffs during this campaign too, and he's called India's air filthy, which a lot of Indians agree with, but he said it. Do you think Indian Americans will be repelled by Trump's incoherent policy on India?
See, I think the overall Indian American voter has had a huge shift in the last 4 years. In 2016, it was 78-22, Hillary Clinton versus Trump. But I think in this election, the president will peel at least 10 or 15 percentage points more. And the reason I say that, I was involved with the Howdy Modi rally last year, and there was huge support for the president. But the overall thrust of this election, I'm going to echo Colonel Rogers in saying there's a groundswell of shifting support in favor of the president, and that's because of two things. This election, even though it's mostly fought on domestic policy, what's changed this year is the Chinese Communist Party exporting the virus around the world, which has impacted not just the U.S., but India and other countries. So now people are really aware that foreign policy is domestic policy. It's connected. And the second point, policy you mentioned, Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Esper are in India the last couple of days. They're talking about a new relationship with India to take the ball forward. And India and U.S. could be the defining partnership of this century. And a lot of Indian Americans recognize this, and there's going to be a shift of support in favor of the president.
Was Howdy Modi an expression of support for Donald Trump or for Narendra Modi?
I think it was a combination. I would say many of the volunteers and even attendees were historically supporters of the Democratic Party, and that's because of two reasons. You know, after 1965, many of the Indian Americans who came over, it was due to the policy of President Johnson, who's a Democratic president, and that kind of carried over. And even if you remember, the Indian public has had a huge fondness for President Kennedy, President FDR, who were big supporters of India, and FDR was supporters of India's independence. So there's a legacy of support, but it's slowly shifting because in the last 20 years, the Democratic Party has kind of abandoned or taken the Indian American vote for granted. They have, been more pro-Pakistan and pro-China, and that's rubbed a lot of Indian Americans the wrong way. And these people, especially when they see Joe Biden's, if you remember the most recent vice presidential debate, Senator Harris didn't really criticize China for the negative impact that the country's had on the U.S. economy. And same with Joe Biden. So I think the Indian American community is going to remember this, and a bunch of them are going to shift their support for the president.
I think there are a lot of issues here. One is China is a different matter, although what China does impacts both Indians and Americans and Indian Americans. The other is how Indians see this U.S. election, and especially the right wing overwhelmingly supports Donald Trump, but they don't have a vote in the U.S. election. This is an American election. And then how the Indian Americans see the election and where their vote lies. Kelly Hyman, has Trump been able to sway the Indian Americans to his side?
I don't believe so. We in our country believe that diversity is great. And Kamala Harris, who is the first African-American woman and also Indian woman to be VP, and she represents our country and what we represent. Donald Trump wants to divide our country, not unite our country, and Biden and Harris want to unite our country. And so I think it's important that people get out and vote. The way that Trump's administration has handled immigration is what makes our country great in the U.S. Diversity, people from different backgrounds, different experience. And Biden and Harris, who represent that, they represent our country. People in the U.S. are struggling personally, professionally, financially, and they want change. And Biden Harris brings about that change. As a woman, it's so great to have a woman as a VP, and any woman that votes for Trump votes against her interests because he doesn't support equal pay for women. He doesn't support women's rights and a lot of other reasons on why he should not be reelected. And so I think that it's important for people to get out and vote and let their voice be heard, and so that Biden Harris win in 2020.
Well, those are a lot of sweeping statements there. Kelly Hyman, I want to ask you, do you agree that the Democrats are seen as less pro-India compared to the Republicans under Donald Trump? Because it is under Donald Trump that India has become central to America's Indo-Pacific policy. I know you can come back to me and say this is not about foreign policy, but since we're talking about the Indian American vote and how they see their government's policies towards India, also Joe Biden's statements on Kashmir did not go down very well with many in India.
Well, you have to remember his VP is from Indian descent, and I would disagree with some of those statements in regards to the foreign policy and what Obama did in his administration for India. Having said that, people want to know, about the concerns about the economy. People here are struggling, and it's also healthcare. Those are issues that are affecting the people in the U.S., whether you are an Australian American, Indian American, no matter, that standpoint, that's what people are concerned about. And people are concerned thinking about, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And the answer is no. Donald Trump is not helping the people, nor is he helping our allies. He's alienating our allies on the way that he kisses up to dictators and throws his nose at our allies. So I think things will be definitely better with Biden and Harris in 2020.
Lieutenant Rogers, many say that Kamala Harris is pulling the Indian American votes away from the Republicans. Harris has not shied away from bringing up her Indian origins. Her nomination clearly has mobilized her party and her community. Wouldn't you agree?
Listen, sweeping statements by the last guest with absolutely no foundation of fact. Keep in mind that Indian Americans are contributing to this day to this roaring economy. They're building businesses. Entrepreneurship is up. They're hiring people. Joe Biden was the guy that said you can't go into a 7-Eleven in America without running into an Indian. What an insult. How about, Joe? How about the Indian Americans that are running companies, employing people? You see, the fact of the matter is that Indian Americans are not looking at race, color, creed, or even sexual gender. They're looking at intelligence. They're looking at who can do the job. So President Donald Trump has solely supported Americans of all backgrounds, including our Indian Americans. And keep in mind, remember what happened in Houston when the great leader of India, Mr. Modi, came? I mean, my goodness, thousands and thousands of Indian Americans attended. I have not seen anyone in the Indian community rise up and endorse Joe Biden as they have President Donald Trump.
Varun Nikor, I wanted to respond to that. Also, we recently saw Nikki Haley, another leader with Indian roots, campaigning for Donald Trump. Do you feel the Republicans have fielded her to counter Harris?
I mean, they've certainly tried, but, a person like Nikki Haley, who has worked for the most failed administration in the history, not only of the United States, but practically the world, should be ashamed, absolutely ashamed to even call herself Indian American. Those aren't Indian ideals that she represented when she was in office. Those aren't American ideals. Frankly, those aren't even humanistic ideals. This administration, Nikki Haley included, absolutely are vile human beings. And they will go down in the dustbin of history, frankly, as a 4-year time period that there will be case studies for eons and generations, and say this is exactly what happens when you allow demagogues to rise. And anybody who associates themselves with demagogues, including Nikki Haley, are going to be affected and thrown into this pile. There is absolutely nothing to be proud of over the last 4 years, not one thing. And as an Indian American, I'm absolutely insulted by someone like Nikki Haley, who would essentially perjure her own ideals, frankly, in exchange for something very simple, to have access to power. And so she will not have a platform. Donald Trump will not have a platform. This will be the closing 6 days of the worst chapter in American history.
Right, we'll have to wait and see. And we'll try and keep the discourse civil. Dave Ramaswamy, do you think the Republicans lack a true Indian American face, and the party hasn't sort of made an effort to build its presence within a key and influential American community?
I'm going to slightly disagree with Varun. He's entitled to his opinions, but he's not entitled to his facts. The fact of the matter is, the President Trump has appointed Indian Americans to high positions in his administration. You've got Seema Verma heading Medicare and Medicaid. You've got Ajit Pai heading up the Federal Communication Commission. And Nikki Haley was ambassador to the United Nations. It's a position of cabinet rank. And up and down America, he's had Indian Americans in key positions. So, and I'll echo what Colonel Rogers said. What the Trump administration offers is a clean break from the last 25 years. He's forging new alliances and discarding old ones, which didn't work. He's cut off funding to Pakistan. He's called out China for their exporting the China virus across the world. And he's forming what I call this new alliance of liberty with India, Japan, Australia, and other countries who are democratic, who believe in the rule of law, who believe in freedom of navigation. And this is a new alliance for the 21st century. And if he's reelected, and I'm pretty confident he will be, based on the groundswell of support you're seeing up and down America, this alliance with India will continue.
Would you agree to that, Varun Nikor, that Donald Trump is the only leader, perhaps, American leader, who has effectively dehyphenated India and Pakistan and cut off funding to Pakistan?
I can't speak to that, frankly. And once again, I don't think Indian Americans really, care about that. They care about the safety and protection of their families, first and foremost. All the research, all the polling, all the data says that. Frankly, Donald Trump is the most failed leader that we've ever had. And he declared on his website somehow yesterday that, he defeated the pandemic, right? That effectively the pandemic is is over. And this came on the same day that we reached a milestone in our country of over 500,000 infections, right? I mean, so the irony in this is just, is actually appalling and shocking that someone would declare victory over a pandemic when case counts and infections and deaths are now approaching 230,000 in this country because of his failed leadership. And so there is such a disconnect between the ego of Donald Trump and those who align themselves with him. It sort of belies anything related to India and Pakistan. And, I don't even understand, frankly, why, there might be sort of a very small few folks who care about that, but frankly, I don't even think they're voters. This has been our history. Our guest who represents the Trump administration said that there, all these voters in New Jersey. Last time I checked, New Jersey wasn't a battleground state. Yes, they have a large Indian community, but, Donald Trump said that they were going to win New Jersey in 2016. And of course, it was a blowout then. It's going to be a blowout now. And frankly, more and more Indians are going to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And there's absolutely no evidence to the contrary. So I don't know where, our last guest can't cite any research, any facts whatsoever, no data, no polling. This is great rhetoric, but unless they can show the evidence, we know that just like the last 4 years from Donald Trump, these are just words and this is just rhetoric.
Right, and I think we're saying all things here. We're saying that Indian Americans do not necessarily care about the areas where Trump might have scored a win, like Pakistan or other foreign policy issues. At the same time, we're saying that Indian Americans do not care about Donald Trump per se, and they still remain a committed vote bank of the Democrats. But we'll have to wait and see then. Kelly Hyman, Kamala Harris has been vocal in her criticism of the Indian government, especially on Kashmir, just like Joe Biden. If the Biden-Harris duo were to take office, do you think that would affect India's relationship with America?
I think that if Biden and Harris are elected, I think it's going to help the relationship. We have to think Biden has a lot of experience in foreign policy, and he works with our allies.
But none of his contributions stand out. Allies. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry?
I'm saying none of Biden's foreign policy wins sort of stand out.
Well, he is someone that's going to unite our country and not divide our country. We have to think about, as I said before, about Trump, how he looks up to dictators and how he alienates other countries and does it. And we have to also think about his position on immigration, on how he doesn't understand or believe that diversity makes our country great. And if you look at the Biden and Harris, they are diversity. They are what our country represents. And that's what we need. We have to think about in 4 years, we are a divided country, and that is because of Trump under Trump's leadership. And if we have we're going to be more divided and alienate ourselves with other countries, such as India. And we've already alienated so many other countries. And so I think it's important that they will work with different countries and work with our allies and work with the UN. Trump, wanted to get out of the Paris climate change. He just wants to alienate himself from other countries. And Biden and Harris want to unite our country, and not only our country, but with our allies. And so I think that they will move this country forward and build greater relationships with other countries, especially India.
Right. I'm running out of time, but Dave Ramaswamy, I want to ask you this. Indian Americans are, after all, Americans who happen to have roots in India. Do they vote differently on different issues, or do they vote like any other American on jobs, on economy, on healthcare, and the basic domestic issues?
I think it's a combination, Palki. As you know, in India, there's a Sanskrit saying, the mother and motherland is more precious than heaven. And I think the Americans, Indian Americans who've been here a long time, like over 50 years, and people who are born here, consider America their homeland and motherland. And of course, they want what's best for America. But in some cases, there's a convergence of interests. And the convergence of interest is the biggest threat to America is the Chinese Communist Party, and also radical Islam. And under President Trump, he has completely demolished radical Islam, taking the fight to ISIS in Syria and Iraq and killing about 50,000 terrorists. And as you see, now the U.S. Has brought about peace agreements with Israel and Bahrain, Israel and Sudan, Israel and the UAE, and all these countries lean towards India. So, and the other aspect is the unfinished business, which is the Chinese Communist Party needs to be held to account. And for some strange reason, and it's coming out over the last 2 weeks, is Joe Biden, through his family, has had very close relationships with the Chinese Communist Party. His son and brother have been doing cutting business deals with the Chinese Communist Party, with companies there, the energy companies, military companies. And that's been a huge conflict of interest. And all this happened when he was vice president. So, Americans don't want a potential presidential candidate with a for sale sign hanging around his neck. And that's what we are seeing with Joe Biden. Of course, the mainstream media has completely buried the story, but it's going wild on social media. And about 70% of the Americans have found out about this.
Right.
And this impacts not just America, but India as well.
Yes, we've reported this story, but we've also reported that Donald Trump has bank accounts in China that he's not told the world about. And when it comes to conflict of interest, the president has much to answer for. His daughter and son-in-law are senior members of his staff. For what qualification, I'm not quite sure. But we were talking about Indian Americans and which way their vote will go. And we have two Indian Americans on this panel, and they can't seem to agree with each other. So I think that's where we'll leave. I think that's the message for our audience, that no one can take this vote bank for granted. Thanks very much to all of you for joining us. I'm completely out of time, but it was a good conversation with you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
US Election Dialogues. Co-powered by Tata Consultancy Services. Transforming India. In association with Tata Sky Binge Plus. Isko Laga Dala To Full Family Jingalala. Driven by Ford. Presenting new Ford Endeavour Sport. Meet the other side of you.